So I'm interested in buying a tripod and I'm really not sure what I should be looking for.
That's a great question. One of the issues with tripods is it's always a balance between affordability, strength and weight. So you want to obviously have something that's affordable, that's not too heavy, but is strong enough to support your camera. And there are a lot of small, lightweight tripods that are a good price, but sometimes the problem is buying something that's too short or just a bit unstable. You'll notice on this tripod, I don't have a center column. And the reason for that is if you buy a tripod with a center column that's not very steady, then they kind of wobble around a bit, especially with a heavy camera.
Okay.
And for me, as I never use a center column when I'm doing landscape photography, I may as well have a tripod that doesn't have one. It's just extra weight that I'm not going to use. So, having said that though, on these Faisal tripod, you can add a center column and it is actually very strong. But as I don't use it, I may as well not carry it.
What is the purpose of a center column?
It just helps to raise up the camera if your legs aren't long enough. And also, it's very useful if you're, say, photographing a piece of art on a wall. If you haven't got the tripod exactly the right height, you can just raise it a few inches very quickly and easily. So they are very useful, but the big problem with center columns is a lot of people get a tripod that's too light and they put the center column up too high, and then the camera's wobbling around on top of the center column, so it defeats the object of getting a tripod in the first place.
Okay.
So center columns are good, but they have to make sure that it's a nice solid one. So the other issue with tripods is height. If your tripod isn't high enough, then a couple of things can happen. One is if you're on a bank of snow, like we are going to have here, that by the time you push the tripod into the snow, then the tripod ends up being too low.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first came to the Canadian Rockies, I brought a tripod that I brought in the UK. I went out a couple of times in the winter time and my camera was down here. So I had to buy a bigger tripod. And then weight is key. So if your tripod's too heavy, you're not going to carry it or you're not going to enjoy your photography.
Mm-hmm.
The best way to get a strong, lightweight tripod is to buy a carbon fibre model. But carbon fibre tripods are expensive. A few years ago, I discovered this company called Faisal, and they make tripods from Taiwan, and they're very strong, but they're very good value. So I now use Faisal. This, you can feel the weight of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's light, but it's very tall relative to its weight. So we can just untwist once and get all the legs out. So it's pretty fast to deploy. So it's a good height tripod. So another thing is if you get a tripod that's too low, then maybe you go to the Grand Canyon or somewhere like that, or the edge of a cliff and there's a fence there, then you can't get the tripod to see, or the camera to look over the fence, so then you've got another problem. So having a tripod like this is nice and tall. If you're doing wildlife photography, this is even too short for me, because if I put a big lens on here and I'm pointing up at a bird in the sky, then I actually have to be down here looking through the viewfinder. So I have another tripod that's even taller.
Okay.
So I can just stand up there and be comfortable and focus through the lens, even though the tripod's up high. But this is, for me when I'm travelling, this Faisal 3442 it's a great weight. It's strong enough even for my big Nikon camera, and it's just an excellent travel tripod.
Mm-hmm.
Now the second part of a tripod, so we just talked about the legs, is the head that goes on top. Now I use a ball head, which means that there's a large ball here, and we simply release this knob on the side and the ball moves around.
Okay.
So it's very useful for wildlife photography and landscape photography.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to do a lot of video, then you might be better off with a pan and tilt head, because they're more suitable for video applications. So depending on how much you're going to do is important. One issue with a ball head is that as well as having a ball that moves, you want to have a separate pan control. So I've got a separate control here that allows me to pan. That's particularly useful for doing panoramas. And also if you want to kind of do panning action and support the weight of the camera on the tripod, then it's useful for that too.
Are the heads interchangeable?
Yes, that's a good question. You can get different sizes of ball heads, different types of head, and all you do is it screws on to the legs. So these are two separate items, and then these threads are always the same. It's a 3/8 of an inch thread, so that's a common size.
Okay.
So if you've got an old ball head that you really like, or an old pan and tilt head, and you want to buy new legs, you can do that, or vice versa.
Great.
Now, then we have to attach the camera to the tripod or the ball head, and that's usually done with a quick release plate. A company called Arca Swiss came out with a quick release plate years ago, and it's become kind of the industry standard in that lots of generic camera plate manufacturers make them to fit Arca Swiss compatible clamps like this one.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're buying a ball head, I would recommend buying one that has an Arca Swiss compatible clamp. The reason for that is it then allows you to go and buy an aftermarket plate. So this plate fits this D3 camera really snugly,
Mm-hmm.
so that if the nut gets a little bit slack, then the camera's not going to move too much. Now this is an L plate, which I'll demonstrate how this works in a minute,
Okay.
and the advantage of it. So when I use this ball head, I like to have the knob at the front. In winter time, if that's facing this way, then as you breathe on the back of the camera, it starts to get covered in ice, and it can actually be quite uncomfortable on your chin. So I just have it this way around. Then I slide the camera in like this, and then tighten it up. Now, if you didn't have the L plate and you want to take a vertical picture, you have to drop the camera into the groove on the side like this. Okay?
Yeah.
And the downside of that is that sometimes it's a lot more fiddly to try and get it vertical. But the bigger problem is that we now have a lot of weight onto one side of a very lightweight tripod.
Yeah.
And this is typical for all carbon fibre tripods. Because they're so light, having a lot of weight on top makes it a bit top heavy. And on a windy day, it can be prone to falling over.
What can you do about that?
Well, there's two things you could do about it. You could, most tripods come with a hook underneath it, so this one does as well. So you simply screw the hook underneath,
Okay.
and you can get your camera bag and then just hang the camera bag underneath it. If your camera bag's quite light, then sometimes if I'm out hiking, I'll just take a small string bag with me and just put a few rocks in it and hang it underneath there. So you just want to have some weight basically to pull down. To overcome the vertical issue, then a very useful plate that you can buy is called an L plate. So this L plate, we can see we've got the quick release plate on the bottom and on the side. So that allows me now, instead of just tilting the camera over, I can simply attach the camera straight on its side like that. And so that's a lot faster to set up, to switch between vertical and horizontal, and also it allows me to have the weight of the camera acting through the legs of the tripod, so the whole thing's a lot more stable.
That's clever.
Yeah, so with these L plates, you simply buy the L plate for the camera body that you've got.
Great.
So that's a basic run through of tripods. So if you can, I would recommend getting a carbon fibre one, and if not, get an aluminium tripod that's a decent height. It's always a compromise between weight and price. So those are my tips on tripods.